Welcome to B2B Commerce Corner. Commerce Corner is a sub-series of the E-commerce Edge podcast discussing all things B2B commerce through the lens of agencies, consultants, merchants, and more. Enjoy. Mr. Kerry Young from Bluemeteor PIM, welcome to the podcast. It's great to see you today, man.
Oh, Jason, thanks for the opportunity. Appreciate it.
My absolute pleasure to have you along with me for the ride today. And you're based in Ponte Vedra Beach, Florida, yeah?
Yeah. Have you been here before?
I've not been there. My wife and I absolutely love Miami, though. We've been to Miami a few times. We've got some friends that live there. We've been to Orlando. We've been to West Palm. We've been to a number of places, but not exactly where you are.
Yeah. If you're familiar with San Augustine area, which is North Florida, that's where we are.
Very nice. So you're closer to Jacksonville.
Yeah, we're very close to Jackson. Exactly.
Very nice. Listen, it is very cool to have you along for the ride today. And you head up things over at Bluemeteor. You're the president and COO. I've been doing that for nearly 4 years. But before we get into Bluemeteor, what it is, what makes it special, how you do what you do, and kind of the markets that you focus on with your technology, help me and the audience understand, how did you come to be in this space of sort of product data management, and then more broadly, obviously, e-commerce, digital, etc.?
Yeah. So I started my career, first half of the career, I was actually working in industry. I worked for one of the largest semiconductor distributors in the world. And we had a continuous product data problem. Although this was pre-internet, this was early mid 90s, but we still needed solutions for managing product data, doing quoting better, or managing inventory or supply chain. A lot of experience working with a very large sets of product information. I think we had nearly, I don't remember now, 30 million SKUs or something, 40 million SKUs. It was just enormous. In that industry, the number of SKUs was just huge. Once I left that company, I joined forces with somebody that was also there. And we started working with companies who were trying to take their product information. Again, this is pre-e-commerce, and get it into catalogs, the print catalog, and automate the print catalog process. So back in those days, the print desktop publishing tool was something called Corp Express, which I don't even know if evolved. It's still around these days. And it was a completely manual process of taking the product information and getting it onto the page. So we automated that process. So as part of that automation, we had to create a product catalog. And that's how we got started in the PIM space. It was to automate print product catalogs, essentially. Eventually that evolved into, okay, now let's also populate e-commerce websites. And then eventually we got acquired by a company called EnterWorks. And then I stayed on. EnterWorks is a PIM MDM company, stayed on with that for, I don't know, 15, 20 years, and then joined Bluemeteor. So I've been in the PIM space. Back then, we didn't even call it PIM. There was no such thing as product information. It was just catalog management or
Product data management or something like that.
It wasn't even, it was probably catalog management. So then eventually it transformed into PIM and MDM and all the things we know today.
And when you came were you a co-founder of Bluemeteor, or did they bring you in as an outside part of the leadership team to lead Bluemeteor forward?
Yeah. So the way that Bluemeteor got started is a gentleman named Sanjay Agrawal, who was the founder of another company called Codified. Started Bluemeteor within Codified. Codified was one of our partners at EnterWorks. Actually, it was one of the partners of my first company as well. So I got to know Sanjay, and the codified folks over the years, and then left Enterworks precisely at the end. He called me up and said, "Hey, do you want to come over and join me here?" And eventually I did. So that's how I ended up at Bluemeteor.
And, what's interesting, and look, I've never worked with Bluemeteor before as a platform. I have worked with many PIMs over the years because there are many PIMs in the market. But what I find interesting about Bluemeteor is they seem to lead, at least based on the website and based on what I've found online about Bluemeteor, the platform, they lead with a discussion about distributors and manufacturers. And yes, you, of course, support retailers too. But I think you're one of the few PIMs out there that doesn't lead with retail, right? If you look at a Kenny or you look at any of the other sort of major PIMs that people know about, or Syndigo or any of the others, they almost always lead with a retail conversation, a retail product management conversation for retailers, for aggregator retailers that are bringing together disparate product data from 500 suppliers, and now they've got to get it into their own taxonomy. They got to get it into their own structure. They've got to get it into their own sales channels and shopping comparison websites and social channels and everything else. But what I find super interesting is that you guys lead with the conversation around what I consider to be the harder end of the industry, which is manufacturing and distribution. And it goes back a little bit to what you said earlier, which is in manufacturing and distribution, we tend to have catalogs that are orders of magnitude larger and more complex than your typical retailer would have. Because what a retailer needs, at least the products that most retailers sell, people recognize. Like if I'm looking at a t-shirt, I know it's a t-shirt, right? If I'm looking at a coffee mug, most people know what a coffee mug looks like, right? But in the
Yeah.
wholesale distribution space in particular, a lot of this stuff, two pumps sitting side by side might look, for all intents and purposes, identical, but they could have completely different specifications and they could have completely different functions that they perform inside of a business or a brewery or food service or whatever it might be. And because of that, we can't rely on general knowledge of people's general knowledge.
Mhm.
We have to get really granular in the type of
Right.
information we provide around particularly industrial products. And oftentimes they have safety, regulatory, compliance data. Obviously, if we're talking a steel beam that's going to be holding up a building, you don't want to be wrong about that data, right? And so we have much higher standards and much higher risk in manufacturing and distribution if we don't manage product data properly. Have you
You're
seen
right.
that too?
Yeah. Yeah. You're right. In fact, the reason we landed on this originally is Codified, we spun out of, they were focused on implementing PIMs and MDMs for primarily in industrial distribution. So their heritage was B2B primarily. And so when they were implementing the solutions, they were continuously running into certain feature gaps all of the time. And some of it had to do with what you just described, dealing with this complexity, because the more popular products at the time didn't really handle B2B all that well. So they started developing all of these sort of add-on solutions for popular PIM solutions that address this. So when eventually we spun out of Codified as a separate standalone company, our customer base was primarily B2B, industrial distributors and manufacturers. And so what we had built and what we continue to build really takes into account what you just described, which is the complexity that goes around with B2B, whether it's the super large volumes of data, product data, whether it's the complexity of the products, whether it's the regulatory issues that you described, whether it's some of there are also even some supply chain differences between how B2B works versus B2C products. So yeah, so we tailored our solution that way. Not as you said, not that we can't work with B2C because we do have some very large B2C customers as well. But the functionality was really geared toward complex B2B situations.
And I think some of the things that I see that tend to stand out for me from a complexity perspective in B2B, first of all, we have more default digital channels in B2B than we do in retail. So, In retail,
Yeah.
sure, we might be sending a product feed out to Amazon. We might be sending a product feed out to Google Shopping. We might be sending a product feed out to our e-commerce website and maybe some shopping comparison websites and kind of job done, right? From a syndication perspective. In
Standpoint.
B2B, because we're selling through oftentimes not just a portal, we're selling through EDI, we're selling through punch out catalogs, we're selling through so many different types of digital channels. And then sometimes we want to have custom integrations with a dealer or a manufacturer to a distributor, where we just want to provide an API endpoint where they can pull down the data in and however they want to, and they can ingest it however they want to, and they can map it into their system however they want to. And so we have this channel complexity in B2B that is just so unique.
Yeah.
And when I think about the workflows of getting the data into a PIM system and out of a PIM system in B2B versus B2C and D2C, it is channel complexity is just part of it. But then we tend to have significant amounts of non-pure text data, meaning that we've got spec sheets, we've got exploded drawings, we've got CSVs, we've got 360-degree view, we've got product video, we've just got the types. It's not just the quantum, but it's the types of data that we have to support selling very complex products like that. It's a quantum question, sure, but storage space in Amazon, for example, is not that expensive. And so it's not just a pure data storage issue. It is an organizational standardization and retrieval issue just as much as it is a storage issue. Then when we think about all the hands that typically touch this data in your typical B2B organization, in retail, we might just have one merchandiser, we might have a small merchandising team, and they become responsible for all product data across all channels, right? Whereas in B2B, especially for engineered products, we now have engineers looking at products. We have sales reps looking at products through one lens. We have customer service
Right.
looking at product data to serve them. We have maybe some merchandising people that are looking at products. We have compliance and regulatory personnel. We have legal. Like we've just got so many more people involved,
Yeah.
and there's so many ways to get the data wrong along all those waypoints of enrichment, as I like to call them. Like the stage gating in B2B is pretty extreme. And historically, what I've seen is that for B2Bs that are new to PIM, they have used their sales reps as the filter for doing what a PIM should be doing to get data into their customers' hands in the right way. And so by that, oftentimes it's the 30-year-old grizzled salesperson that's been in the same industry for 30 years. They know exactly where on the network drive to go and get the exploded drawings. They know exactly, they may have a CSV of information sitting on their desktop computer. They've got some stuff that they can do an extract out of an ERP. Then they can bundle it all together. They can zip it up into a zip file, and then they can email it off to their customer or send it via WhatsApp or whatever it is, right? And so for a long time in B2B, having the sales rep be that filter before product information gets into a customer's hands, that's been the final safety check, as it were, of getting the right data into the right customer's hands at the right time. But as those people age out of our industry, a lot of that tribal and institutional knowledge is being lost. And
Yeah.
that is probably my biggest concern about product data in our industry today. Is that a vector of opportunity for you guys at Bluemeteor that you're just seeing that accelerate?
Absolutely. Yeah, you didn't even throw in, you layer in all the standards that happen in this industry as well. I need the data now in ETIM, or I needed it,
ANSI or
this.
whatever it is.
Yeah, so you throw in all of that. Yeah, so that's definitely happening in terms of the knowledge workers, the people, the experts that were doing this manually are all retiring, leaving the company, et cetera, et cetera. Even without that, if you think about all of the work that goes into what you just described, so I'll go on the outbound. It's not that this person who's working with this particular channel or customer can just give them an Excel file. They have to, one, take the data that's in their format and somehow translate it into the customer's format. So whether that's in a certain file structure that they need, or you have it as a certain attribute in your data, they call it something different, or they may they may have 3 attributes where you're 1 attribute. You just have to, this sort of mapping and transformation process that has to happen, even for the expert in the company, is a headache, huge headache. And that's the same coming in as well. I'm getting all my data from all these different channels, suppliers, data pools, whatever. It is complex to do that just physically, just from an automation perspective. But it's the mapping, the transformation, the normalization to get it into a unified catalog. So it doesn't look like it's coming from 100 different places. That's really hard to do. And interestingly enough, because of where Codified came from, and they were seeing this all the time, they actually noticed that around 70% of the work that a customer was thinking they were going to do in the PIM, they were custom coding that 70% through scripting, through database, through other applications, just to get it in or out of the database, out of the PIM. There wasn't the functionality there to really do it in a streamlined way, or if it was there, it was too complex to use. They couldn't figure it out. The average guy that's doing this or gal who's doing this, they need something relatively easy to do it. So that's how, again, we landed on, okay, let's really solve this, not just the PIM problem, but the problem of how do you get the data in and get it out in a way that's manageable and scalable as well.
I think also, to your point, expectation of the amount of business logic that needs to be able to be supported in a PIM system has exploded, particularly not just because of AI, but augmented by AI, that there is now an expectation that PIMs can do more than just be a database of product information that can be easily connected to via APIs. I'm thinking of things like almost everybody today expects audit trails. Like they have to have it, right? Who touched the product data? When was it touched? When was it changed? Can we roll forward and roll backward through audit iterations of the product, edit iterations of the product data, because mistakes can be made and we need to roll back to a previous version that we know was right. We also have a scenario where other types of business logic, like rolling data up and down variants. So we might have a parent product that there's certain attributes that should be rolled down to every variant of that parent product, and some data that only lives at the parent product level. We have some data that comes from the child products and needs to be rolled up either to one layer above or to the very top. And we have also the complexity of multi-layer attribution of products and calculated attributes. So for example, we might say, okay, cool. If we find this word or this value in a title, and then we find this value in an array of this attribute, then that means we automatically create dynamically this third attribute based on either a concatenation or a truncation of those other attribute values, right? And so we have different types of attributes, right? We've got multi-select, we've got arrays, we've got plain text, so the volume of both structured and unstructured data that we have to deal with today, that is in many cases channel specific. That means the amount of attributes that we're managing today is unlike anything we've ever seen before, right?
Definitely. Yeah. And it's interesting. Everything you said is 100%, and it's super complex. And really forever, since I've been in the business, most of that's been a very manual process. You have, in some companies, armies of people who are there, who are entering in data, or fixing data, or changing data, or standardizing data, normalizing data. And Matt, I guess that's fine if you're big enough. The mid-sized to smaller distributor, for instance, they don't have those type of resources to put at this. As we continue to see more complexity in the number of channels and the number of rules and all the things you just mentioned, really the dream of the distributor is, hey, can you do something? Can you create something? Well, I don't ever want to go into the PIM. I don't want my people ever to go into the PIM. I want to automate this entire process, right? The system to be smart enough so that the data can come in, it's organized, they categorize the way it needs to be, and then it gets it's e-commerce ready at the other end. I don't want to go in and do that work. But yeah, it's interesting because it's getting more complex from a requirements perspective, but the expectations in terms of the amount of work that somebody wants to do to meet those requirements is going down. They don't want to do that. They want to find a way of satisfying those requirements without having to do all this manual work. So it's, thank goodness for automation and AI and all the things that are coming to fruition, because that really enables a lot of that to happen without an army of people working on it as well.
I think the other challenge that particularly industrial distribution and manufacturing face are that there are both units of measure that can create new SKUs let's say you've got a spool or a roll, or I was working with a massive industrial belt company recently, and they get belting in. It might be 2 meters wide by 250 meters long or something like that, but that can be broken down, and they'll cut the width and the length to the customer need. Like the narrowest that they might sell is a 2-inch belt or something like that, and the shortest length they might sell is a meter or whatever it is. But what they do is they effectively cut it off of this raw material roll, then they fuse it together wherever it needs to be fused, and then they send it out to the client. And so that raw material, what effectively in the ERP is known as a BOM, effectively a bill of materials. Okay, cool. We got this raw material. It breaks down into so much of each one of these different SKUs that we could sell. The problem is that those sub SKUs don't exist until someone orders that specific cut of that product. Then they create it. Then they create that specific SKU, that specific variant SKU in the ERP. Okay, 2 inches wide by 1 meter long. Now we take the base SKU of the roll, and then we add a hyphen to it maybe, and then we add a couple of extra letters or a couple of extra numbers, and that now is our SKU for that fully created light manufacturing type of a finished good. And so the challenge is, and I'm working with a couple of companies right now that are manufacturers in the industrial space, and they are going, we do not have, if we exploded all of our raw materials into all of the variants that we could make and that are available through us based on those rules, we would go from like 1,000 SKUs to 10 million SKUs. Now, the problem is that some of our distributors, for example, they want that 10 million SKU catalog, but we can't give it to them because we only have what we've made to date in our ERP because we needed to sell them, right? So we have the base SKU, but we don't have the exploded available SKUs. And we see this in furniture. We see it in a lot of industries where effectively they've got what's known as a composite SKU. The first 3 letters mean something, and then the next 2 letters mean something, and then the next 2 and then eventually you build out this SKU, build a SKU, and now when it gets ingested for fulfillment, we now know by looking at each of these segments of the SKU, okay, this is what we're actually making to send out to a distributor or to a customer. And so this is where another area where I have seen PIM become extremely valuable, where we can take those base SKU and through rules, we can say, okay, only in the PIM have we exploded all variant options out. So yes, all variant options are available in our PIM system so that we can create a digital catalog to send to our distributors or whatever it is so that they can see, and then we can maybe attach a CPQ to that data so that we can have the rules-based calculation of the price so that we can send them not only a catalog and a price for every single thing that maybe only a quarter of those live in our ERP with a fully qualified price today. And so I think when you think about industrial distribution in particular, and you combine PIM with CPQ and the rules base around both of those, you now can do things that even your ERP can't do, or certainly can't do it easily and were never designed to do.
No, you're right. Yeah, it's interesting too, because that use case you just brought up, it happens a lot. And there's a lot of reasons why it's better to do in the PIM than anywhere else. One is what you mentioned, which is you just create all of this stuff in your ERP system that you don't need. But even we work with companies where that's not the only issue. They want to sell these online, but they don't have it would also complicate the e-commerce experience a lot as well. So we've even done things where we've created this dynamic situation where, okay, somebody configures something online. Let's actually configure the SKU in real time make it so it's an entry in the PIM, and then we'll send it to the ERP. So by the time the order is placed, it exists in the ERP because it has to be there. ERP
Yes.
system, right? So yeah, there's all kinds of things, but you're right. And we get, a lot of our opportunities come from people over the years who tried to do some of these things in their ERP, and it worked for a while, and now that because of build to order and because of all the other things, furniture is a great example, that they need to move this out of their ERP system, and they're buying PIMs and along with CPQ to do this specifically. Yeah. Now I actually just see that growing as well, right? Build to order is going to just get more popular, not less
Yes.
popular, and not just in complex industrial situations, but I think everybody wants the ability to configure something or build something specifically to a customer requirement.
And it's not just a t-shirt where it's size, color, and design, right? Like we're talking that there are in a pump, for example, you have inlet diameter, outlet diameter, flow rate, head control, like and then you've got it for certain industrial situations, submersible, hygienic pumping. Like you got the layers of complexity you can have in some of these products, especially in a build to order or in a partial build to order, like maybe you've got the base product, but then you add the inlets and the outlets and everything at shipping time. Like you pull these components together in a light manufacturing way. That now means that the amount of raw materials or the base SKU that they have to hold in inventory is significantly less. So it moves from a asset heavy model to an asset lighter model when you are
Yeah.
building to order, because everything that you sell is modular in nature. And
Yeah.
we're seeing that across the whole of industrial supply chain today, or B2B supply chain full stop, is that most things are moving to a modular model so that
Mhm.
so that they can pull 3 items off the shelf, bolt it together, and boom, we've now got a SKU. And
You-
that makes sense, right? Like you don't want to have to hold 100 of every single finished SKU that you could sell.
Yeah. And I think too, you're right. And it's not just industrial, it's not just B2B. And I had a situation in a half life where we were working with that very popular electric guitar manufacturer, and they wanted to be able to offer build to order electric guitars. And it was this huge configuration deal where you could pick what you wanted and they would build a guitar for you. We're doing this right now for fireplace manufacturer, right? Or distributor who is, when you buy a fireplace, you may need a certain size of different things or a certain amount of, glass rocks in the fire pit or whatever it is. It's all a configuration problem, build to order problem. And the PIM really helps that process a lot in terms of standardizing how it can be done. In our case, we work with the different CPQ engines to enable them to get good product information into these engines so they can accurately do this as well. But yeah, it's happening. It's exploding. Build to order and modularization is happening everywhere right now, for sure.
And how do you guys start to think about AI and PIM? And the reason I ask that question is and look, I've been working in the PIM world or been exposed to the PIM world for probably not my whole career, but probably for at least 15 years. I've been exposed to the whole PIM world and how
Mhm.
PIMs manage certain things, how they organize things. They've all got similar functionality, but it can be handled very differently from a workflow perspective, etc. But it seems to me that PIM is not yet to the point where, and I think we'll probably get there, not sure when, could be in the next 12, 24, 36 months at the rate of AI advancement, but we're not
Mhm.
quite at the place where we can effectively just dump in a bunch of product data into a data store or database, get it all vectorized, and then make it all queryable. Like today with the large language models, I can do that. I can upload a PDF or a CSV or whatever it is to Gemini. I can start querying that instantly. I can start asking questions of it. It can do create a summary. It can tell me on what page, it could be a 500-page PDF, and it can tell me exactly on what page that piece of information is. It can summarize it for me. It can link me to that page. I think a combination of multimodal mixed with conversational AI is enabling things that we just never seen before in our world. We just never seen it.
Mhm.
It's a first. It's unprecedented. That's very
Mhm.
exciting, but it still seems to me that PIM is still leveraging AI mostly for taking these big stores of data, and instead of making them directly queryable as is, turning them, structuring the data, mapping the data, getting into these very highly structured and organized and standardized data stores and data models, and then mapping them out to the third-party system or internal system data store and models. For example, my e-commerce platform might structure its product data model. Its data primitive might be very different to what the standard data primitive in the PIM might be. And so we're going to say, okay, for the e-commerce platform, we're going to slice and dice the data this way and send it out this way that maps the way the e-commerce platform or the site search engine expects to
Right.
receive that feed, right? So that we can
Right.
present things like facets and filters and navigation and search and find and all that sort of stuff. Like we need data in certain structures, but
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
wonder how long that is going to continue to be the case, because
Yeah.
modern vector data stores mean that we can take any data in any format, structure it into a vector data store, and then query it directly. And we can do a hybrid search, not only looking at the vector data, but also the metadata as well, the file name, the file type, all that stuff. And we can search the metadata in a hybrid search model that now maybe we don't have to do the level of normalization, standardization, structuring, mapping that we used to do, because if we
Mhm.
slap an MCP server on the front of that, if we get asked a question, maybe we can just query that big giant data store
Yeah.
directly.
Yeah. Well, I think you're right. I think for sure what we know is that whether it's PIM or any current application, it's not going to look the same, or it's not going to behave the same, or it's not going to even, maybe it won't even be relevant 12 to 36 months from now. And in what I see in the PIM world, what's going on now is you see where people are basically, or companies are basically creating applications that put a UI engine, AI, create product descriptions or try to fill in certain attributes. That's more of an enrichment type of solution. And in a lot of those cases, you could almost just as easily do them. You said you could go into an LLM and put it in and it will do it for you. I don't know why you necessarily need an expensive solution for doing that, but there are some out there and people are doing that. Where we see where we're trying to use AI, and again, I know eventually as graph and vector databases and all these other things really get popular and more capable in terms of from an AI perspective, maybe even some of this won't be needed. But we're taking data. So on the inbound, we're able to use AI. I'll back up. What the dream is in industrial distribution, as I mentioned before, I don't want to do any of this stuff.
I don't
I
do
want to,
anything with it.
I want you to come in and I want it to be e-commerce ready so so it's on my website. That's really what I want. So there are a bunch of steps in order to do that, depending on how large you are as a distributor, how many sources you have, where the data need to get to, how,
How trustworthy the data is even.
the regulatory requirements that you need to live up to, the data governance that you're trying to do. You factor all of these things in. What we've been using AI to do is make that sort of pipeline process much easier to do. So we're viewing product information management more as a pipeline workflow process, not from a person workflow
Like an
process.
agentic workflow process.
It is an agentic workflow process. And how can we enable that where we minimize as much as possible humans in there? Of course, there still has to be a human in the loop interface that allows them to make certain decisions. There has to be what you said, this MCP interface that allows them to query the data and do it in a way that's using however they want to do it, whether it's voice or however they want to access the data, they want to do it. But that's how we're leveraging AI right now. And we're looking at it more from an agentic perspective than a just pure data enrichment perspective, which is popular right now. So we're trying to enable, we say we're trying to enable the dream, and we're doing that for several customers today, where we've certainly, if not completely eliminated the amount of manual work, we definitely drastically reduced it through this sort of agentic pipeline approach as well. Yeah. And again, who knows though? It's in some ways with all of this stuff, and you just imagine just by looking at what others are doing in other industries, forget about the software industry from an autonomous perspective. And you just
Robotics.
start robotics, you just start trying to think what's really going to be needed in the future. And, you're probably only going to be 2 or 3% correct because you don't know. But it's interesting for our team. That's what we're always showing them is, okay, look at this new autonomous car. Look what it does. Look how it works. Look how you don't even need to drive in it or this. We give them all these types of situations because we're trying to get them to think much more broadly as well. Most people think so linearly in terms of how all of this works, including our developers, and exposing them to all of the stuff, some of which who don't live in the United States, and they don't see all of this stuff happening, just so we can get them to think
Bigger.
differently, bigger.
Think more like Elon Musk. How can we bring all these weird, disparate things together and take some ownership of things? Have you been able to ride in a Waymo yet?
Oh yeah, definitely.
And my first experience was in Scottsdale last year, and I was blown away. I've always been an early adopter of tech anyway, but I tell you, we live down in Mexico now, and we don't have Waymo down here yet. And in fact, it's not even that widespread in the US yet, unfortunately. But I tell you, the first time I rode in it, I was like, this is the kind of future that we've been promised since the Jetson days. This has been stuff like I'm 51 now, and this kind of stuff has been envisaged for a really, really long time. But it feels like we're actually finally starting to get delivery of some of those futuristic visions of the world, that we're actually starting to see some of that stuff come into real life, everyday useful real life application today.
Yeah, it's really just the beginning, but you're right. And so I've driven the Waymos, but when I was probably at the same place you were in Scottsdale, and I just was sitting out in front of the hotel, just watching pull up and pull out and how they maneuvered and how they moved. And it's almost not believable how well it works. And I was just watching the other day a company who's implemented salespeople, AI salespeople. It's a auto sales place. And you could listen in to customers who were calling in, and this AI thing was asking questions, eventually even all the way to taking the order. You would never know that it was not the human being, the other side of it. It was just so realistic. It was just, the questions were unbelievable that it was asking, and the way it was helping, and the way it was just, it's, again, we're just at the beginning. That's where it's going to be even a year from now. It's hard to imagine, but it definitely is impacted more than impacting the product information management industry. And we're all moving. I think I'd be surprised if every one of us in the industry isn't moving as fast as we can to try to take advantage of AI in some way.
Yeah, and if for nothing else, then speeding up your own internal coding capacity and ability, things like code and cursor and things like that. I think if you're a software company and you're not building your software with AI assistance, you're probably going to be falling behind. I couldn't agree more. If we were to look out over the next 6, 12, 18 months for Bluemeteor, what are the 1, 2, 3 things that either your customers are asking for that you don't yet do today, or gaps that you see in the market that you go, hey, we don't do this now, but in 6, 12, 18 months, we will be. What are, from a product development perspective, what are your top priorities right now?
Yeah. So it just in concept. So we have this sort of North Star, which is, again, we achieving this sort of dream state where data just comes in and is somehow becomes e-commerce ready and ends up wherever it needs to get to.
Kind of like
So
magic,
that,
right? We think of it almost like magic. Oh, cool. A bunch of data in and great e-commerce data out.
yeah. In fact, the original concept, the original sort of internal code word that we had for this thing was the magic uploader. So that was what we called it. And we have the magic PDF extractor, and it is like magic. It's not, but it feels like magic. I think that is, for us, that is where we're putting most of our energy, is in this sort of automation, agentic area to automate as much as we can. But also, the more that you automate, the more data that people want to manage in the solution, right? Again, before, when we first started, it was just the SKUs maybe that you have in inventory. And then then eventually people wanted to go endless aisle. And then now people want to go not just endless aisle, but they want to keep all of the information, not just the product information, but okay, what is all the information about the suppliers that manage the product information, and what is all the pricing data and all this other stuff, making it scalable enough and fast enough so that the more automated and agentic it becomes, the more data that we can handle and process. And then eventually everybody's going to be able to do that, I think, right? Because automation, and it's just going to become easy to do. So then what becomes really valuable then is what you're able to do with that information as a distributor or manufacturer, and then giving our customers the ability to use AI to prescriptively do more with their business based on this information, price things better, buy things better, sell things better. What all of using this information to more intelligently run your business is where we want to get to. We're starting with, we need to automate the end-to-end process, but then eventually it's, how do you actually use this information more intelligently, what it's learning, what it's doing to more intelligently run your business as well. So
Amazing.
that's our dream.
Yeah.
Can we get that? And how fast can we get there?
And if you could sprinkle fairy dust on the PIM industry at large, product catalog industry, whatever you want to call it, and you could change one thing about it at the snap of your fingers, what would it be?
What one thing I could change, that kind of finger? I don't know. That's a good question. So just in the software space in general, one of the things, so I was always on the other side of the table, right? I was the CIO. I was in distribution. I was buying software. All of the crazy games and pricing and all the things that software vendors do to these poor customers. If I could set my
End of the
finger,
quarter deals and all the rest.
I would simplify that so that it's completely transparent. We've tried to do some of that. Completely transparent. It's simple. It's easy to understand. There's no surprises, and none of these games. So I think that's more of an industry thing than a PIM.
Mm-hmm.
But I think AI is also it's already driving change as well. So excited by that. Even though I'm not buying it, I'm selling it, I'm excited by that anyways.
And when you think about that future, that golden future, how do you think that your customer cohort mix? First of all, I guess the first question is just finger in the air. Is it like 20% retail, 80% B2B today, whether it be manufacturing or distribution? Is it 80% the other way? Like, what do you think, if you were to look out 2 years from now, what do you think your client mix, your ICP mix looks like in that future state? Do you think you focus more on retail? Do you think you go deeper and broader in B2B? Like, what is the customer makeup today, and what do you think that looks like 6, 12, 18 months out?
Yeah, it is 80-20 today, 80 B2B,
Wow.
80% B2C. So that is how we are today. I don't know where that will end up, because as we're building out some of these capabilities, it becomes, I don't know how, in the way we're trying to do it, I don't know if it matters as much today as it will in the future in terms of what you are or who you do. One thing that is changing for sure is the size of companies that need this technology. And that's happening already. When I first started in the industry and it was actually really PIMs, it was $1 billion and above. That was like the threshold for revenue. If you weren't $1 billion company, you were probably not going to buy a PIM.
Yeah.
And then eventually it went down, and then it got down to 500 million, or maybe at one time it got down to the largest company that would ever invest. We see because of the pressure of e-commerce and companies who want to have large assortments of products and are competing against the bigger companies. It's not unusual these days for a $10 million distributor to come to us and say, hey, we need the whole shebang.
Yeah.
The same thing that the $1 billion company was needed, 20 years ago. And because they're taking data in from multiple sources, they're getting their data from AD and
EDS,
IDEA.
and then they're getting some from manufacturers.
You can't do that manually and make it work.
No.
It just is too hard to do because they're dealing with too many SKUs. So maybe that will change. But is it going to be, it's becoming pretty much where, if you're selling something online of any complexity and at any volume, you need some sort of automation to do this in a practical way. So that's probably the biggest change I see going on in now in the future as well. But I don't know what that mix will be. We love B2B. So, that is our heritage. We're probably going to really continue to focus in on that. But I'm not sure that in the future that's going to matter as much. Are you B2B, B2C, B2B, B2C, whatever all the different things are.
Yeah, you're probably going to need that functionality from a startup stage. If you've got any kind of sizable catalog and any sizable complexity, you're probably going to need PIM, because, what I see is a lot of retailers use Shopify as their PIM. As a startup, they use Shopify as their PIM system, and then they plug in Amazon to it. They plug in shopping comparison websites to it, and they pull the feed directly out of Shopify and map it directly into these systems. But the problem is, it's because you oftentimes only have the data in there for your D2C website experience. You don't have the data in there for other channels. And so it now all of a sudden becomes a really big problem, because Shopify was never designed to be a PIM. Shopify don't sell themselves as a PIM. They don't pretend to be a PIM, but they are de facto PIM for a lot of SMB retailers. That's the quiet part said out loud. And so I couldn't agree with you more. I think PIM is just going to be, and maybe there still is some striation, because obviously a startup is not going to go and buy a Stebo systems. I got to spend the kind of money on a Stebo PIM, but they might buy Jasper, or they might buy something a little bit more lightweight. They might buy a lower end PIM that doesn't have all the features and functions, but it gets the job done, and it is a stepping stone. It's like a startup today in retail. They're going to start out with Shopify, QuickBooks, Klaviyo, and a couple of other plugins, right? And then a little bit bigger, even if they stay on Shopify, they're probably going to move from QuickBooks to something like NetSuite as their ERP. And then they're going to move from all customer service being done through a centralized email inbox to using Gorgeous to manage their help desk. And then they're, as they grow and as they outgrow existing systems, I think then that provides a pathway. Not all software has to be all things to all businesses. And so I think there'll probably still be striation in the PIM space, but I think we're going to see the smaller PIM players edge up into the more enterprisey end of town. We're going to see the more enterprisey players dip down into the smaller end of town, because especially if they're doing it based on consumption, or they're basing it on SKU count, or they're basing it on something, it doesn't really matter at that point, depending on how they bill. It really doesn't matter how many SKUs you have, whether it's 500 or 5 million. If you're paying based on SKU count, then cool, we've got a pricing plan for you that maybe sits in bands or something like that. So I think there's going to be a lot of growing up and growing down by all the major players.
It's happening already. I see it. And this really happened throughout time. You see the smaller guys going up, bigger guys going down. But it's not unusual, too, to talk to companies that are, as you alluded to, it was maybe the third or fourth that they've had. I remember when nobody had PIM. And so we had Cruise PIM. or they were building their own PIM. Now companies are on their board, so that's not unusual. It's for sure not unusual for a company to go onto their second PIM or third PIM because as you said, they started with something very elementary. Or maybe they bought something too powerful.
Yes.
And now they've learned over time that I don't really need all of that. I just need something smaller. So it depends. But yeah, there's relatively few sort of greenfield opportunities. They've all are managing their data somewhere. Whether it's Shopify and their ERP in another PIM, and now they're looking to do something different. So,
Exciting times. Look, fabulous conversation. I've really enjoyed this. It's
appreciate
always
it.
fun to not only walk down memory lane, but to walk down future lane and try to imagine what happens to the industry of product data management, because it's integral to how most businesses operate today. And it's only becoming more important to feed large language models, especially as they start to integrate commerce into the chat interface, etc. It's just going to become more and more important over time. But now, as we do come down to the end of our time together, this is where I get to flip the script. I get to hand the microphone over to you, let you ask me one question, any question you like. It can be personal or professional. Kerry Young from Bluemeteor, what is your question for me today?
Yeah. So you've been plugged into this PIM space for many years, helping clients do different types of things. You asked me, what is the one thing that I'd like to see different? What is the one thing you would like to see change with either the PIM companies you work with or product information management in general?
I think that I wish our industry long time ago had developed more common standards for every piece of data that flows along the data flow pipeline of
Y-
commerce. And we see Onyx with Order Network Exchange start trying to bring some standards to order data as it traverses order taking, order
Yeah.
fulfillment, reverse logistics, etc. But and I think we've learned from that. I think we've felt the acute pain of a lack of standards, even as far back as EDI. There's not one single EDI standard. There's 30 of them, right? And
Right.
so we saw the pain of no standards when video became normalized and VHS finally beat out beta. Now, in many instances throughout history, the better format of data or the better standard of data didn't didn't win, but what did win was the thing that became the standard the fastest. So the same with Blu-ray versus video disc, the same with all down through data history, zip drives versus CDs versus USB sticks versus everything in the cloud. It all eventually, we do settle on standards: HTML, CSS, JavaScript. That's pretty much kind of the web standard now. You don't see
Right.
websites built in frames anymore. We finally have, and we're starting to see the emergence of standards in the AI world. And I'm so grateful for it, because I think AI will not be able to get into all the areas of our world, truly become ubiquitous, until the standards are accepted by a big enough cohort of developers and users that makes it, instead of it's these things here didn't really take off in the same way until Apple standardized the touchscreen interface, right?
Mhm.
Then, of course,
Mhm.
Microsoft tried to follow suit, and then eventually there was Android, and now we're down to two. We're down to two standards. We're down to Apple, and we're down to Android. But once we got down to those two standards, now cottage industries could flourish around those two platforms. And so we've got MCP, we've got ACP, we've got UCP, we've got Onyx, we've got a few different standards that do different things, but we don't have a single unifying standard yet around AI. I don't think we necessarily need one, but certainly it's pretty exciting to me when I go into Manus or I go into Claude Code now, and all the platforms that I want to connect to, or most of the platforms I want to connect to now, at least have a
Mhm.
rudimentary MCP server in front of them. For
Mhm.
example, I use Read AI to take notes for all my video calls with my clients. Now
Right.
they've got an MCP server in beta where we can ask questions of anything that we've recorded from the agents that I'm connecting to those systems, and I can pull data out. That's exciting.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
I can integrate their tooling, their software, it doesn't mean Read AI is going away. It just means they're actually more useful to me now. And I don't want to have to
Right.
go, I could probably build an equivalent of Read AI using Claude Code, but why would I when it only costs me, what is it, $50 a month or something like that for Read AI? Like, why would I do that? But they are making their software so much more useful to me because they have adopted the MCP standard for agents to connect to
Mhm.
them. And I think we're going to see that accelerate. And that gives me a lot of hope and a lot of excitement about the future of AI in our industry.
I'm hopeful as well. Product data, it's interesting. My theory on why product data is never really standardized is, there are a lot of companies that have weaponized product data, meaning
100%.
I need to differentiate myself online. So I'm going to ask and do things that are difficult for others to do because I'm big enough to be able to do that. And then I can differentiate myself with this product information. So people have been working against standards for forever in this space,
Yep.
at least in the US. In Europe, it's a little bit more standardized with ETIM and some of the other things, but here in the US, it's not. So hopefully we get there, or maybe, as you said earlier, with graph databases and vector databases, maybe it just doesn't matter anymore. It's just
Standards
data that
become
get,
irrelevant.
yeah, maybe. Who knows?
I love it. Listen, this has been a fabulous conversation. I've really enjoyed it. We wish you every success with Bluemeteor, and I hope we get the chance to speak again soon. Thank you so much. Are you a B2B or D2C e-commerce merchant? Then head over to greenwoodconsulting.net to learn how we can help you scale your business.